Hi, everyone. We're picking up now with our episode number 2 of Jeremy Bentham, Not Paul, but Jesus. The vote was 11 to nothing. That means people were enjoying it and think this is valuable. So we're going to continue with the project. And I said this is a book written in 1823 by Jeremy Bentham, one of the most famous people in all of world history. He invented the philosophy of utilitarianism. And so I, in the interim, went and watched a video, and apparently, what he said was a very interesting principle is what the law and society should look to do is to find the greatest good for the most people at the least cost. But basically, you always pick a choice that will do the most good for the most people. And very importantly, is you treat yourself equal in the equation, meaning you are no better than any. So if it's 1,000 people's benefits versus 1,001's disadvantage, you're just one person. And so even if you might benefit, if there's even an imbalance of advantage, it goes to favor to not do that action. You don't put more weight on the side that would uh, recommend an action that would favor yourself in a group that actually has a lesser validity to its needs, and vice versa. If you're in a group that happens to be more advantaged, but it's the greater good, not giving any extra credit for yourself, then that's the social choice to take. And so there's a very different way of viewing things and was very equitable. So you treat everyone is equal. So there was sort of a democratic principle in there. And you're going to find out in the end of his life, he's in Britain, and he's going to advocate the end of the monarchy, voting democratically, and all these other things. And he's 1789. He recommends women's suffrage, and so he's really a person who's way ahead of his time in terms of restoring ethics to law, and then punishments have to be proportional to the offense, which he said the criminal code was in chaos. So anyway, we'll get more into him later. So let's get into the next part of his book, Not Paul but Jesus. Okay, so this is beginning at the preface page VII to VIII. That's 7 and 8. I will endeavor to show, 1, that Paul had no such commission as he professed to have. 2, that his enterprise was a scheme of personal ambition and nothing more. 3, that his system of doctrine is fraught with mischief in a variety of shapes, and insofar as it departs from or adds to those of Jesus, with good in none, and that it has no warrant in anything that, as far as appears from any of the four Gospels, was ever said or done by Jesus. Such are the conclusions which the author of these pages has found himself compelled to deduce from those materials with which history has furnished us. The grounds of these conclusions he proceeds to submit to the consideration of his readers. Okay, now on page IX of the preface, he says, Plan of the work. The work may be conceived as divided into 5 parts. 1. In part the first, the 5 different and in many respects discordant accounts given of Paul's conversion. So he counts 5. That's interesting. Which in these accounts is of course represented as being not only outward but inward, are confronted, and so far as regards inward conversion, shown to be, all of them, untrue, and immediately after, the state of things which produced, accompanied, and immediately followed his outward conversion, together with the time and manner in which that change was declared, is brought to view. This part occupies the first 2 chapters. 2. By the way, you can see he's going to go through this thoroughly, so hopefully we'll all get through this and we'll still be alive. I'm teasing, but I think he's doing it methodically, so you can't. He's going to uncover every stone there is. Part 2. Part the second is employed in showing that from the first commencement, the intercourse, which upon the tokens given of his outward conversion took place at Jerusalem between him and the apostles, to the time when, in consequence of the interposition of the Roman commander to save him from the unanimous indignation of the whole people, more particularly of the disciples of the apostles, he was conveyed. So he's talking about Acts 21. Now, I want to show you that footnote 2 that he referred to. So he says there's 5 accounts of his vision, his appearance account. And what he means is there's 3 in Acts, but there's 2 references in his letters. Now, we're going to see that they're nothing compared to what Luke has, but that's maybe the point. And so we'll hold that off and wait and see how Bentham handles that. But so here's his proofs. So he's found all of them, and he says he's indebted to his friend for helping him. So somebody else is helping him find all these things. So it's the references are Acts 9 verses 1 to 18, Acts 21 verses 3 to 16, Acts 26 verses 9 to 20. So those are the three in Acts that we know of. Then he's going to claim Galatians 1 is a fourth, verses 11 to 17, and then number 5 is 1 Corinthians 15 verse 8. So we'll get around to seeing what these exactly are, particularly the latter two. We all know about the three in Acts. Okay, I've actually decided to not go reading this book word for word because there's so many long sentences. And in this introduction, he's just kind of giving you an overview. And so it's summary. But I do think you might want to listen to his overview of what's going to be chapter 16. And I remember reading this, and this was really striking me, not here, but I read chapter 16 where he literally calls Paul the true Antichrist. And Paul gives us an imaginary Antichrist, so we won't look at him. And I thought that was a very observant remark. So I'm just going to quote this part of the what he calls part 2, where he's now summarizing the overview. So when he gets to chapter 16, this is what he says you're going to find. Chapter 16 and the last chapter, winds up the whole with some general observations on the self-declared oppositeness of Paul's gospel, as he calls it, to that of the apostles, together with an indication of a real Antichrist in compensation for the fabulous one created by Paul and nursed by the episcopal authors and editors of the Church of England, translators of the Bible. And by chapter 12 of the present work, the imaginary Antichrist is, it is hoped, strangled. So in other words, he's going to disprove the Antichrist Paul claims is the Antichrist. When we're looking right at the Antichrist, he'll actually hit the nail on the head at the end. So I just thought I would include that from the summary view, and then we're going to go into the meat quickly, then much more quickly, then. So I'm starting this whole video over after I did another video, but I think this is better, getting to the point. Okay, and here in his final paragraph of his introduction overview, he says this. In respect of doctrine, so this is what he's telling you ahead of time. This is going to be the conclusion. The conclusion is that no point of doctrine, which has no other authority than that of Paul's writings for its support, can justly be regarded as belonging to the religion of Jesus, any more than if at this time of day it were broached by any man now living, that thus, insofar as he is seen to have added anything to the religion of Jesus, he is seen to set himself above it and against it. That therefore, if this be true, it rests with every professor of the religion of Jesus to settle within himself to which of the two religions, that of Jesus and that of Paul, he will adhere, and accordingly either to say not Jesus, but Paul, or, in the words of the title to this work, not Paul, but Jesus. So he's saying basically, I'm going to make it so that you have only two choices. You either say you're for Jesus or you're for Paul. You can't be for both. And we saw that in the recent video of the blogging theology video. Okay, so this is a really striking conclusion that he's telling us he's getting to by the end of this book. And you the reader, you the listener, you the person who's hearing whatever we're saying to them, they have to make this hard choice between Jesus and Paul, because they are not the same thing. The sheep and the goats is as opposed to Paul as fire is to water. They're just like, they don't mix. One will extinguish the other, and it's usually water. So we want to be with Christ. He's the pure word of God. Okay. Anyway, so let me see. We have some more info. This video is now much shorter than I had it before. So. Okay, and then Bentham on page 1 of the book is going to introduce the book of Acts and how important it is. He's basically going to get into the Damascus Road experience. In one single work, and that alone, is comprised the whole of the information in which, in relation to the momentous occurrence, any particulars, meaning the Damascus account, any particulars are at this time of day to be found. This is that historical work which in our edition of the Bible has for its title the Acts of the Apostles, for shortness, let us say the Acts. Of this same occurrence in this one short work, no fewer than 3 separate accounts are visible. That's Acts 9, 22, and 26, just so we know. One in which the story is related by the historian, meaning Luke, in his own person. 2 others in each of which Paul is introduced as giving his own account of it. So there's Acts 22 and 26 is Paul's own versions. And then this is funny. Of these three accounts, no two will be found agreeing with each other. That's true. So you can compare 1 to 2, 1 to 3, they don't agree. You compare, 2 to 1, well, they all don't, each one has a conflict with the other. But what's interesting is Paul has an inconsistency, a major one between his two accounts, which is even harder to account for. Okay, so it says, by the historian Paul, when introduced as speaking in his own person, is represented as contradicting not only the historian's account, but his own account. So it really is, it's almost funny. It's almost beyond funny. Okay, so let me keep looking here for quotes in our short, this is our short video, so I want to add a couple. All right, now I want to show you something. This is page 3. He's now going to give us some interesting proof, something I've overlooked or failed to mention or whatever, but it is an important fact, and he's looking at the dates and years. So he went and dug in and he found out remember he started saying it was a 26-year period, 30-year period is being recorded in the book of Acts. But what you need to understand when you're hearing that is Luke is talking about events that happened around 37 AD, according to Paul, in the city outside the city of Damascus, when Jesus supposedly visited him then. But what is the year that Luke is writing? How many years has passed? So how much memory loss could have happened over 30 years, or however many years? And he's going to say it's approximately 30 years, 26 years or 30 years. So let's read what he says right here. This is page 3 of his book. The year 35 after the birth of Christ is the year which, according to the received accounts, meaning authorities, Bible scholars, is assigned to the occurrence. According to these same accounts, the year 63 is the date given to the last occurrence mentioned by the historian. So he's saying 35 is the occurrence of the Damascus account, but according to the same accounts, the year 63 is the date given for the last occurrence mentioned by Luke. So Luke is writing in 63 AD of events that occurred 35 AD. So that comes out to 28 years. Now he's going to round it off to 30, but that's 28 years. Now let's keep going. After which occurrence, 2 years are stated by him as having elapsed at the time at which the history closes. Oh, okay. What I think he's saying is the last occurrence in the book of Acts is in year 63. But by the time he's now writing, 2 more years have elapsed. That's right. Somewhere at the end he says, we're waiting here for 2 years in Rome or whatever it is. So all the last material event had occurred 2 years before even the book of Acts had been written. So remember, they have to go do this appeal in Rome. And so Luke is helping him, and Paul has set up house, and all of this is going on. So we can't ignore that. So what he's saying is the last material fact was in 63, and yet Luke is recording the event. All the events are being summarized 2 years later. That's 30 years. He's saying, yeah, so 2 years after 63, 65. So 65 minus 35 is 30 years later. Luke is recording the events. So literally, he's writing the book of Acts when he's in Rome, which makes sense. Remember, this is intended to give to the judge Theophilus, the magistrate assisting Nero. So it all fits together. So this is something that, look, I've been studying this for years. Did I see this before? No. This is why studying and looking at somebody who looked intensely at this, very intensely, every little detail, and he has a team of people helping him. Obviously, it's pretty obvious to me. So and they are looking up every detail, and they're working like a team to make this book put together. So don't underestimate this book. What it's going to show us, new things we never thought of. So how can Paul and how can Luke be able to record events 30 years later with any kind of reliability? And of course, if Paul were inspired, we would say, well, okay. But you see, that's assuming something that has to be proven. And you can't assume it's true in order that the proof you're listening to becomes accepted, even though normally you would say it's so long after the fact it lacks credibility. In other words, if there was any supernatural aspect to this should have been proven at the time. Don't We can't make this decision 30 years later. You've never told this account to anybody at an approximate time that they could handle it. So people don't remember this, but Paul basically doesn't spend but a brief time with the apostles. He even says so 3 years after the events. Okay, this is his own account, although Luke seems to give him a sooner event. It's not clear, but regardless, the point is this: is that then Paul goes away for 14 years, and it's called his mystery period. Nobody even knows who he is, where he is. He's in Arabia later, he says, but he does nothing, and he has no contact with the apostles, and he's proud to tell you, I had no contact with the apostles. I went off to Arabia for 14 years. So, I mean, this event is so ancient that you could say anything and nobody will know who the other people were present. You haven't given us enough details to even track down any of these people. Even Ananias, nobody has any idea who that Ananias really is, who he mentions, who 2 weeks later he's in town and he meets this guy who says, hey, no, not 2 weeks later, but he goes into town of Damascus, and he meets this guy who says, hey, I had a dream 2 weeks ago that this would be happening to you. Well, that's an important person, right? But who is he? He's not a saint. He's there's no record of anybody talking to him. Nothing. He's like a nobody. There are other people called Ananias, but that's not him. We don't know who he was and where he lived for real, and whether he ever was interviewed to corroborate Paul. So, boy, this is like 30 years after the fact. We're trying to reconstruct all these events, and that's literally what we're left with. And it's so let's listen to him. So he's going to say here, according to these same accounts, the year 63 is the date given to the last occurrence mentioned by the historian. So the last thing in Acts is 28 years after the fact, after which occurrence 2 more years are stated by him as having elapsed. At that time at which this history closes, here then is an interval of about 30 years between the time in which the occurrence is stated to have happened and the time in which these 3 mutually contradictory accounts of it were framed. So the reason he's saying, one of the reasons they're contradictory of each other is that so much time has elapsed. And what does that mean? They show the signs of something that's not inspired by the very fact they're all inconsistent with each other. So you can say Paul contradicts himself between Acts 22 and 26, right? And he contradicts, and then Luke in Acts 9 contradicts Paul in both accounts. But what is the inherent problem is inspired material cannot be present when you have contradictions between them. So is it a choice of picking one or the other? Well, you can't say Paul's the one always telling the truth because Acts 22 contradicts Acts 26, his 2 accounts. So he can't be inspired because he's contradicting himself. Well, then is Luke the inspired account? Well, he's the only one speaking, and he can't be a better witness than Paul. So if Paul is invalid, and we know he's not inspired, then the only person Luke's relying upon is already been proved to be uninspired, and that's Paul, who gives 2 contradictory accounts in Acts 22 and 26. If you don't remember what that is in Acts 22, he asks the Lord, who he thinks is Jesus, says, "What am I to do?" And he asks him, "What am I to do?" And he says, "You won't be told now. You'll go into the city, and you'll find out." That's how Acts 22 ends. And Jesus says nothing more than, "Hello, my name is Jesus." And Paul asks that question, and then Jesus shuts him down and says, "You'll find out when you get into Damascus." And what do you think happens in Acts 26? Jesus gives him a laundry list of things that he's going to do. You're going to be a missionary to you're going to be a witness. You're going to be a missionary to the Gentiles. I mean, it goes on for 6 or 7 verses. It's completely contradictory to what he says in Acts 22. So if he's contradictory of himself, how can he then support what Luke is recording, which obviously has only come from Paul? So this is the problem, is you are talking about something that looks completely like human error. People who are not inspired cannot be consistent with each other 30 years after the fact. And the source of the problem is obviously Paul. He can tell multiple different accounts in different times, in different places, and they're inconsistent. Luke is just being a faithful historian, writing all 3 down. That's the truth. He's the only one who's got any sense of truthfulness here is Luke, because he's showing you all the warts. Roberts, who did a famous commentator, Baptist commentator, and he did word studies, and he even says, Paul, what he thinks it is Luke is just showing all the warts, of the situation and not trying to correct them or reconcile them one with the other. because he wants to show he's being as honest as he possibly can. I believe that. So what's the end solution? Somebody is incorrect, and somebody is not inspired, and that's all points at Paul, because he's self-contradictory, and he's the only source for Luke, who then contradicts Paul. So it's not Luke's fault. It's actually somebody told Luke an inconsistent account, and that has to mean there's a third inconsistent account we're not seeing, which is when Luke is first told by Paul what happened, and Luke writes those notes down, and those notes go into a binder, and then later, Luke hears the Acts 22 account. He writes those in a binder. Then Acts 26 happens. Maybe he writes those in a binder, and none of them agree. And he's not there. He's not going to decide which one is the correct one. See, so this is the interesting thing here. Let's see if there's anything else here. Okay, I think again, that's all I wanted to bring out here at the moment. Okay, so God bless. Take care, everybody. Hope that helps. Ciao.